This is Eddie Wilson welcoming you to Austin Roots, a podcast about how Austin, Texas became flavored the way it is.
And this is Dr. Jason Mellard, a cultural historian, doing my best to connect the old and the new in this city we call home.
Or the center of the musical universe.
There are many ways to tell the story of Austin as a musical city, and one of the most persistent tracks a national narrative. The creative tumult of the 1970s made possible by the psychedelic and countercultural revolutions of the 60s, rooted in the folk revival that preceded them. Powell St. was at the forefront every step of the way. In the folk singing circles of both the University of Texas and Threadgills, alongside Janis Joplin and Lanny Wiggins, as a friend of and songwriter for the 13th Floor Elevators, and then as a pioneer of country rock with Tracy Nelson and Mother Earth. He has remained an active and engaged artist all his days, and we're lucky to have him with us.
Pleased to meet you.
The first time I saw you at Threadgill's playing a harmonica with that bunch of old reprobates, of which you were by far the youngest.
Oh, yeah.
How did you come to Austin to go to the University of Texas?
That's right.
Where did you come from?
From Laredo.
Laredo. Oh, deep South Texas.
Deep South Texas, right on the border. I grew up on a farm 10 miles south of Laredo. It was on the river. Stone's throw across very shallow water from Mexico, and people on the other side were really poor.
You moved here in the late 1950s, into the 50s, right?
1959 in summer school.
What was the city like then, and how was it different from Laredo, where you hailed from?
Well, boy, it was quite different from Laredo. In Laredo, where I grew up on a farm, came into town in 1950 when my dad went back to teaching. And I had the strange experience of going to high school where he was principal. He was the big guy at the high school. There were all kind of rumors set up about me and how I got special treatment. I thought to myself, I didn't argue with him, but special treatment, it was whack on the head because he didn't let me get away with anything. In Austin, I felt like I had even more civilized place than San Antonio, and certainly more civilized than where I came from. For years, as a kid, I was fascinated with the cacti. There was a place in Laredo on the highway right in between a bunch of motels where this lady had a restaurant and cactus garden. I'd go there and I kind of wondered why she had this whole section with the beds of peyote. In those days, it was legal. I said, Ms. Jones, why do you have so much invested in peyote? And she says, it's the Indians from Oklahoma and buy big quantities. And I provided the bud, and he got this idea that peyote was a bad thing. They came in and burned up all her stuff. She had one specimen, and it looked like a brain, and they took it, destroyed it.
So you brought your love of cactus up from Laredo. I believe you also brought your ability to play harmonica. That was something you picked up really early on.
Yeah, I've been playing harmonica since I was at least, before I was 12. It would have been 1950 that I started listening to music. And I got a little transistor radio and could actually hear rock and roll. Started learning how to play the harmonica. A year before, I'd been playing flute. As a child, I was afflicted with ear infections every winter. And so the doctor said, well, that playing the flute puts extra pressure on your speaking tubes. That's what's causing corruption to be blasted into his ears and causes abscess on his eardrum. So he can't play flute anymore. But I got a harmonica. There was pressure, but it was a different application because you blow and draw both. I never was made sick by my harmonica, so I got to play it a lot.
So it was that harmonica that got you into the Austin folk scene in some ways, right? How did you get into the folky circles in Austin?
After a year in school, school, I wanted to get out of the dormitory. So I applied to, it was probably a boarding house, and I stayed up there going to school in the summertime too. I had a roommate in the summertime. He came in, he was an Austin boy. His name was Wiggins. He heard me playing harmonica, and he says, "Hey, you should meet my little brother, Lanny. He plays banjo and guitar and both, and knows all kind of folk songs." We decided to form a duo. We called them the Water Creek Boys. We used to meet in the backyard of the ghetto just about every night and play music and drink beer. When Janis came to town, Janis said she just wanted to be one of the boys. She sat down, sang about 3 songs with us. We realized that we had to snare this chick somehow. We needed her talents. So she joined up, and there was Water Creek Boys still, and sometimes they'd say with Janis Joplin. Not too often, though. She discouraged that overall. She just wanted to be one of the boys.
Powell, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your relationship with Kenneth Threadgill.
Oh, sure. Threadgill was a well-known bootlegger during Prohibition. He was just a humble bartender by the time I came along. But he had stories. He knew everybody in Travis County. Have a bunch of musicians on Wednesday nights. Threadgill could sing, could yodel too. And the repertoire being from years and years of listening to Jimmy Rogers, the first American professional musician, the first country music. Threadgill knew all of those hit songs from the 30s, and we being into that kind of music and had our own banjos, guitars, and so forth. And Threadgill's was way out on North Lamar. These old boys lived out in the country and called the cedar choppers, and they'd come out with their delightful truck and a bunch of axes and cut down all your cedar. And that was who frequented Threadgill's. And they were a rough bunch, too. They had a bad reputation, especially with college boys. So we sent some pioneers out there to see what it was like. And they came back and said, "This old man runs the place. He's a great guy. He said everybody's welcome." Says, "If those old boys give us any trouble, I'll take care of them." So we made our way to Threadgill's, and we brought along Janis Joplin. Janis Joplin was our nuclear weapon. She paralyzed the rednecks. Threadgill himself was over the moon.
The lot that Threadgill's restaurant sits on, he bought that, and it ran all the way to Grover Street. He had a couple of rent houses and some livestock back behind that restaurant site well before I got along. And one of those rent houses, Jackson worked into one of the comic books as the place that cop busted in and woke up. Threadgill's runner, he called him a mule. That rent house was cases of whiskey stacked to the ceilings all the way through the house, and they kicked open the door and jumped into the room with their weapons drawn. And Kenneth's very devoted employee woke up, and the cops had him, and they said, "Where'd you get all this whiskey?" His guy said, "What whiskey?" They said, "All this whiskey stacked up to the ceiling here." Honest to God, officer, when I went to sleep, there wasn't any of that whiskey in here. And they beat it on a search warrant. They didn't get in any kind of trouble for it. Kenneth would sometimes tell this story and strangle with laughter.
Oh, boy. You know what that whiskey was like?
Oh, I never drank whiskey.
Do each of you remember what brought you to Threadgill's for the first time? Like you had said, Powell, it was an unlikely place maybe for you to show up as a UT student initially. What was it like the first time you walked in the door?
I remember those days. We had a place in town that we could go and have fun. Before that, I don't remember going into any such establishment routinely. If you look at Eddie's Threadgill's cookbook, it's got a whole cartoon in the back by Jack Jackson, and done very professionally, where he goes through all of that with a person looking like Joe Brown and saying, "Just tuck your hair under your collar, maybe they won't notice." And that's what it was like. We were apprehensive. The people who lived out in that end of town, congregation would put on a revival. Kenneth would say, "Damn revival ruined my business for at least a week and a half." Oh all my customers go away. He didn't have any use for them.
So, Eddie, when would you have started showing up at Threadgill's?
Probably 1959, when I was a sophomore at McCallum. I was trailing the Glutamus Maximus of Kenneth Threadgill's younger daughter, Dottie. Dottie sat next to me in a speech class, and I thought that perhaps she was attracted to the sensitivity of the pimply-faced football player, because I couldn't help but cry a little bit. I lusted for Dottie night after night, and finally brought myself to go to Threadgill's, asked Mr. Threadgill if Dottie was there. She wasn't. She was off with a boyfriend who had a car. Mr. Threadgill was so warm in his acceptance of me that I went back again just as soon as I got a car. Said for years he was the only old guy outside of the church or the high school that ever remembered my name. I believe that old 78 jukebox of his only held about 10 or 20 records. It was very, very minimal, but he had a big old shelf full of records there behind that lunch counter and a turntable. He would play records in the middle of the afternoon, nobody there, and talk about who was on steel guitar and who was here and who was there. He was a musical education just waiting to spill over for anybody to, come in and give him a little time. So by the time I went to Armadillo World Headquarters, and it became my pleasure to present Mr. Threadgill to my peers. So we started putting him on the stage at Armadillo with other folkies back when Jerry J. Walker was a folkie. He just fit right into the lineup. Really appreciated it. He really thought the world of being able to go down there and mill around all those young kids. Gosh, I got nostalgic.
Were some of these two a part of the UT folk sings and the student union? Was that one of the places you'd play?
Oh, yes, we did that every week.
What did the room look like, feel like? What kind of people showed up?
A bunch of, I guess they were Democrats, I don't know. For the most part, anyway. There's some strange people, though. The artistic types, people connected with the Texas Ranger Humor magazine and Gilbert Shelton. Everybody just came there and played a song or two if they wanted to. It was a very open scene, very democratic. Always at least one guy that didn't know standing around watching everyone. That was also a part of the scene.
That old folk sing, Mr. Threadgill had the beautiful naivete to actually call it a hootenanny.
Yeah.
His license plate was the Hootenanny Hoots. It was Wednesday night. It was always a little bit hated because you didn't really know who you were going to get to listen to and who you were going to have to listen to.
Yeah.
And you'd never get enough of Kenneth Joplin. You'd never get enough of Stan Alexander. Never get enough of Powell's harmonica playing. But you'd get way too much of a whole lot of other stuff. Pal, I just remembered the name of one of the songs that you used to sing that I loved so much. Sal's got a wooden leg.
Oh, yeah.
Sal's got a wooden leg, so they say, keeps a meat rag stashed away. She greases that wooden leg every day.
That's right.
So
down by the seaside, sitting in the sand, I got splinters all in my hand. Sal's got a wooden leg, so they say. Yeah.
Does anybody have a copy of When I Set My Chickens Free?
I don't. I wish I did.
That's a mighty good tune, and it came fully equipped with a complete Jack Jackson comic on the cover of the 45. Gave my chickens LSD and set my chickens free. It riding in a Cadillac to Washington, D.C.
Sal's got a wooden leg, so they say. Sal's got a wooden leg, so they say. Sal's got a mean leg, sing away. He got a wooden leg every day.
No wonder I remember it.
Everybody clapped when I played the Union Maid. Once was a Union Maid who never was afraid of goons and gigs and company thieves in the National Guard that made the raid. This Union Maid was wise, she organized the guys, and so forth. But we didn't do that with the Threadgills. We never got anything much political at all. I knew Threadgill was very friendly with the Liquor Control Board, but I never heard which side of the fence he was on, and it never came up at Threadgill's.
You know, when you ask about Threadgill's, what it looked like back then, I'm taken back over and over again with a little memory flash on all of it to Jack Jackson's comic book. And a lot of my memories of the late 50s and early 60s are taken right out of Jack's comic books. And that's what I picture.
Well, he knew what was going on. He could illustrate it pretty well. I always had a lot of respect for Jack.
And he was historically minded, too. He did so many history comics later that I would trust the stuff that he did about Threadgill's. Tell me a little bit about John Clay. He seems to be such a big figure in all those stories.
Well, he lived in the ghetto before anyone else did, rather before the new wave of young squirts like me that didn't consider ourselves beatniks. We considered ourselves something else. I got called a beatnik many times because there was hardly any distinction in those days in the minds of most people between younger and older beatniks.
Then they're sort of on Guadalupe, Dirty Martin's a little bit, maybe, the burger joint.
Across the street, it was a barrack, bachelor officers' quarters that had been bought in from Bergstrom after the war, and they did have a garage component to it, and John Clay lived over the garage, and the rest of the building was like apartments, upstairs and downstairs, and that's where the beatniks used to live. Still a renegade bunch, but they never liked us much at all, and they'd come by unannounced, spraying mosquito spray in our windows. But that's when cops came by there, because we did have a lot of transients that slept in the yard.
So let's maybe bring it up to the Hootenanny Hoot. What was it like to be a bandmate of Kenneth after, coming in and seeing him as this kind of elder statesman of the folk sings out there?
Well, it was really flattering to me because I had a great deal of respect for Threadgill because he was a great singer and a great yodelist both, and he knew every country song that was ever written just about. I mean, he had a big repertoire, and I just had a lot of respect for it. I was very flattered when he decided that I would be part of the band. He gave me $5 a performance, and that was the most money I'd ever made playing harmonica.
Over the years, various people that had played with Kenneth that told me John Reed had one of the best delivery. Here's a Kenneth story. He had already told me stories about how 3, 4, 5 weeks after playing a gig with Kenneth, and sometimes Kenneth had played 2 or 3 times in a day, Kenneth came up to John and said, I've got something for you. He pulled his sport coat back and he reached in the pocket, and John could see that Kenneth was going through the ends of legal size envelopes, and then were like a file, and he had people's names written across the top edge, and he went through them until he got one that said John Reed, and pulled it out and gave it to him. And he said, this is when we played the Pier about 5 weeks ago. And John opened the envelope, and it had $1.47 in it. Kenneth had divvied out for John at the end of that gig, but he had a delivery system.
And where would these high-paying gigs have been for the Hootenanny Hoots? What kind of places would you be playing?
The Pier, down at the lake. I got back from 6 months in Mexico to get at Threadgill's Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, that's when the music started. And I pulled into Threadgill's, and there was nobody there. We should have been pumping. And went in to see what was going on. Nothing going on. What happened to the music? And I'm like, we don't do that anymore. What happened? The place had gotten so full of people and so popular that it finally got to be a bit of a control problem. And the fire department and the police department and everybody had all these complaints about all of these kids having way too much fun. Hadn't sold gas since 48. Kenneth said there had been a fire in an electrical outlet over the bar, and the fire department had come in, and in addition to spraying down the place real heavy duty, they'd climbed up in the ceiling with an axe, hacked the place where it had started burning, and they had made a big old hole in the roof. It was it they left, and Kenneth just opened up again. He never did fix the roof, but every time it rained, it just come pouring in. He moved the musical events to Saturday or Sunday at Split Rail.
Do you know what year that would have been about when you came back from Mexico? 65. And Powell, you would have started going there about like 62 or so? Is that when you started showing up at Threadgill's?
Around that time, I think, because I left Austin in 1966.
So the Kenneth Threadgill's folk nights during the week at Threadgill's would have been the first half of the 60s. Like that was the golden moment, right?
Yeah.
There's a possibility it was a little bit earlier than that, because I believe Stan was singing out there with a bunch of UT people like Roger Abrams, several other faculty members that could slot factor over into the folk music concerns.
Yeah, those guys were playing in Threadgill's when we showed up. They were proficient musicians, and they played music that we knew as well and could play along with.
Kenneth was the most legitimate when he called it a hootenanny. How can you even say hootenanny without covering your face?
How is it set up with artists and audience? Like, were the people who were playing in one part of the room? How did that work?
There was only one room.
And one old nail barrel, Powell's harmonicas would sit on top of, and there was one of these small microphones, a desktop kind of microphone. It would just move around the barrel. On the bar, had one of those Lazy Susans that was part of the bar format back in those days, and the Lazy Susan had 1 gallon wide-mouth jugs on top, and those jugs would have Pickle's pig feet and pickled eggs and a number of other things that I can't remember because I just gagged.
Did anyone ever eat that stuff? Did you ever see Bill Neely eat a pickled pig's foot?
Never did.
Talk to me a little bit about Mance Lipscomb and how he fits, how he helped you understand the acoustic electric thing wasn't that big a deal.
Mance, after he'd been discovered, Mance wasn't found because he made a record in 1929 or anything like that. He was found on the basis of people that knew about him. They were asked, who's the best guitarist in the county? Oh, they'd say Mr. Mance is the best one. And they all knew about him because he'd been playing in Navasota for years. He was the guy who drove the tractor that cut the weeds on the side of the road, hired by the county to do that. And so everybody knew Mance. And he had been polishing his technique, and his choice of songs was very astute. He'd play everything because he said he was a songster, not a blues singer or just a guitarist. But Mance, I always felt like he was my grandpa. He sure didn't hesitate to tell you how to run things. He had very solid ideas about how you should behave and so forth. You didn't want to contradict Mance. He's a guy I'll never forget.
A lot of credit needs to go to Burton Wilson for ferreting out Mance before anybody else. When Mance played the Vulcan Gas Company, he was already the Burton Wilson repertoire. Burton went to Navasota and took pictures of his kitchen and his house about the same time that the guys were discovering Mance, and Mance had it together enough to take a bus to Austin and get here and sleep with anybody on anybody's sofa to get out of Navasota and play.
There's that famous photograph of Mance at the Vulcan Gas Company backstage, sitting on the couch, playing something on a guitar, and Bill Neely on one side of him looking over his shoulder, and Taj Mahal on the other side trying to get that incessant thumb work that he did.
We gave a benefit for Mance when he had a stroke, and Taj came in and played for it.
You had said that Kenneth Threadgill got the place ready for Mance. What do you mean by that? Why was it necessary to get Threadgill's ready for Mance Lipscomb when he came to play for the first time?
It was a segregated establishment in Austin, and Threadgill said, "Don't worry about that. I'll take care of these guys." He did. And of course, Mance, the most peaceful guy you can imagine. And he sat down the instant he began to play.
Yeah, so unlike, say, Skip James or Son House, Mance Lipscomb didn't record in that first wave of the 20s and the 30s. He's someone who came into his own with the folk revival.
I didn't realize that at the time. Of course, the folk music fans from the university were all behind it and showed up. There was a big crowd. And Mance did a free concert. And that was the first time that Whitman had ever been set foot in Threadgill. I left Austin shortly after.
Yeah, like with most of desegregation, the law changes, but that doesn't mean it changes how all the businesses act, right? So the law changes in 1964, but there are plenty of restaurants and bars and spaces where the reality was it was still pretty desegregated.
Exactly. The stereo behind a number of concerts around town, all Mance had to do is play. And his repertoire was so broad that it had something for everyone. To play like Lightnin.
People often compare Mance and Lightnin. They knew each other. There's a Les Blank film that they appear in together, but they were really different guys.
Totally. Mance was a sweet man, and Lightnin was an irascible asshole. But we did drink the same beer and smoke the same cigarette. Lightnin was not one to be dealt with lightly at all. He hollered at me from the stage at Armadillo. When I get off of here, you better have somebody to help me find where I'm going to next. And I said, well, I thought the guy that brought you was going to take you there. He said, you ain't sending me out in the street in the middle of the night. I started talking about the nephew that brought him there.
And there was an irony because you had to go to a lot of trouble to find Lightnin, if I remember right, the first time you booked him.
I had Mike Condrey of Liberty Hall take me over and introduce me to Lightnin, who was sitting in his car drinking beer and smoking cigarettes out in front of the place. And I knelt beside his window and asked him if he would come to Austin and play. And he said, for $700. And I said, well, that's reasonable. That's 2 nights. He said, no, that's for 1 night. And I said, well, you're going to be there all the way over there anyway, so why don't we just make it a little bit more and make it for 2 nights? Anyway, Mike Condrey, God bless him, made a lot of things possible between Houston and Austin that would have not happened without him.
And, the hard negotiation is a little bit different than Mance, who, like Powell was saying, would stay on people's couches and was, seen as kind of a fatherly, grandfatherly figure for people in the community.
I think there's a possibility that Mance actually took the bus to Austin to play at the Vulcan. He always went home with somebody from the gig, and then he would get there and stay up all night long playing the guitar for the people that took him home. Thought they were just going to wear him out, but he outlasted everybody.
I just wanted to say that if you listen to Mance's lyrics and the songs that he sang, you get a different impression of the man.
So not a blues man necessarily, but the deep blues and the blues life was part of that broad repertoire that he had. It's not that it wasn't something he did.
An important part.
Yeah. Janis Joplin is an iconic figure associated who comes out of this folk scene in Austin, Texas. So if each of you could talk a little bit about how you met Janis and initial impressions of Janis. I know you had sort of different points of view on that. Powell, you're in the middle of that sort of very first grouping. Eddie, you're someone who's starting to edge into Threadgill's as a place.
Before I met her, I heard about her. I knew when I saw her who it was. They did like to drink beer and have fun, and that made them welcome at the ghetto as well.
And who was in that Beaumont circle? So Jim Langdon maybe came out of that a little bit. Moriarty, was he?
Yeah, Dave Moriarty was from that. Langdon had the first piece in the Statesman dedicated to reviewing shows. His recommendation went a long way. I mean, that was the biggest coverage that anybody could hope for, was a favorable mention in Jim Langdon's column. And he had a lot to do with turning some people out to see Janis. He was a big fan.
Did it shine a light on your early music too? Did Langdon ever bring you guys up?
I don't know.
Did you see Janis for the first time? Was that maybe in the chuck wagon?
She came in escorted by Tommy Stouffer. She was wearing a black dress, and she had her hair combed out. She barefoot.
And that's like the picture you paint there. It's a little bit, it's a very distinct and a little bit different than how I see her in photos of the period, right? I think you compared her before to like Morticia as something she looked a little bit like. And then often like in the pictures of that period, you often see her, she's wearing like blue jeans, which would have been a little bit rebellious still in the early 60s.
I'm sure she was insecure. Would have wanted some kind of costume that attracted a certain set of people she wanted to attract, and then instantly repel the rest of them.
She was always one for persona, right? Like she wanted to project something, whether she's walking into a room with a long black dress or kicking in the door of your car.
Guys would come by and shout, "Yeah, hey, baby." And Janis would, "Fuck you, you motherfucker." I mean, obscenely loud.
Which, those words coming out of a woman undergrad in the early 1960s carry a little more weight than they do now. That would have stood out, right?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's part of her influence and significance? Is it she helped make that okay for other women later?
She was strong in the image that she presented, not necessarily true in her own mind. She made okay to project a strong personality as a woman.
Eddie, when was the first time you heard about Janis Joplin?
I don't know that I ever heard about her before I heard her, in that little bar room.
And even if it wasn't bluegrass proper, this wave of the folk revival, Janis sounded a lot different than she would in her rock phase. She was playing a different instrument too for some of that. So what was Janis's instrument of choice in the Threadgill's days?
I never saw the auto harp myself. I just pictured Janis with a mic and her head thrown back, caterwauling.
Shortly after we got together, we got word that we were signed up for the Zilker Park Talent Contest. There were going to be 2 performances, and we came up against a Kingston Trio-style bunch of guys. Later on, for the second performance, tenders were supposed to come back, and they didn't show up, so we were default champions of the Zilker Park Talent Contest.
Powell, how would you compare or think about the music that you and Janis made in the Waller Creek Boys? How is that different than the music, or the same as the music that both of y'all played later? Her and her rock period, and you with Tracy Nelson and Mother Earth.
They were basically the same. Janis came to the West Coast. I came to the West Coast and went different directions.
I was thinking, sometimes when I hear the Threadgill's era Janis, those recordings that are floating out there a little bit, it seems like she's not straining her blues rock voice in the same way. Sometimes she sounds a little bit, there's like that prettier Appalachian ballad. She had that voice too.
She rarely used that voice. She could do Gene Ritchie just fine. And I don't think she changed any of her styles except to get more raucous and more attention.
Eddie, I know that your interactions with her were few and far between.
The first time I became aware of her being aware of me, when she kicked the side of my car and then shot me the finger in my rearview mirror.
In the university area?
Right there at the crossover on the drag, when all of a sudden I was caught in the middle of all those students walking back and forth, and I couldn't move. And as it started to finally thin out and break, I rolled forward a couple of feet, and there was a whoop, and I looked to see who had kicked my car, and there was Janis leaning over the trunk of my car, shooting me the bird in my rearview mirror. That was our very first interaction.
How would you characterize your friendship with her, Powell? What was it like knowing Janis as a friend?
As a friend, she was always my friend. We were out on the West Coast. I didn't see her a lot because we were both busy.
Can you tell us anything about the writing of Bye Bye Baby that Janis and Big Brother recorded?
It just popped out. That's a rare experience. Janis heard it, and I like that. She took off California.
It's an iconic one. I really appreciate it. So Threadgill's, it's coming to a close around 65, shifting over to split rail on the weekend. The Hootenanny Hoots are getting started up. At the same time, Powell, you're getting a little bit more into rock and roll, right? Following the wave of that decade, this would have also been when you were in both on the ground floor of the Conqueroo, also as a friend of Tommy Hall's. You were kind of there at the beginning of the 13th floor elevators, too.
Yeah.
What was that transition like?
I didn't have much problem musically. I was able to transition from one to the other. Then I was with the Conqueroo. Tell the truth, I wasn't with them very long, though, before I left town.
I knew Conqueroo was called that because of St. John the Conqueror's route, but I didn't put together that it was a play also on your name, that it was St. John the Conqueroo.
Yeah.
So, Powell, you were, like I said, on the ground floor with the 13th floor elevators, being a friend of Tommy Hall's, and I believe you were with them when they were starting to scout out Roky a little bit. Is that true? Or
they were, when he was still with the Spades, his high school band. Roky was still Roky. Spectacular guy. Incredible performer.
Did you see their first performance at the Jade Room as well, when they were first coming out?
I saw them twice at the Jade Room. I don't think it was a completely open concert like the second one. I knew there'd be a lot of people there, and there were going to be a lot of people there that were skeptical that anything was going to happen at all. Tommy Hall can't do anything like he's talking about. He's full of shit, you know. So I went there because I had seen them in rehearsal once or twice. Sounded pretty good to me. When they got on stage and started to play, everybody just gobsmacked by the whole thing. There were those who didn't want to give any credit to Roky and the other members of the band taking acid at 10, 2, and 4 every day. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me either.
And, you know, even with all of that, like you said, that there's a kind of an undeniable power in the music that they made and in those first albums that have now come to be seen as, I think for a while they were cult classics. I think it's fair to say that those are just classic rock albums. And you have the credit of writing several songs that appear on both of those, about a half dozen songs or so, including on the first one of my favorites, The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You. That's a great one, Monkey Island. Have you gotten a lot of attention or people writing to you or talking to you over the years about those connections to the elevators?
Yeah, more and more rarely as time goes on. But I too think that they're now just classic albums. They wrote very serious songs. They have had an influence in that respect on the rest of the songwriting and the performance community. Elevators had a great deal of influence on them. A lot of influence on Texas music too. Yeah, I had never heard that they had an influence on Janis, but apparently she listened to Roky scream and kind of picked up on it.
Well, it puts you at the center of things too, because you're a link between Janis and the elevators in and of yourself, right? Both of them have recorded songs of yours.
Yeah.
Is it true that International Artists, the record label, did they reverse your name on the album itself?
International Artists did, yes.
Get out of paying royalties to you?
Exactly. They never did, so it worked for them, I guess.
What was it in the mid-1960s that drew you to California?
Well, I always tell people it was Charles Whitman. You know, I always felt threatened by a certain segment of the population anyway. Now they're shooting people. I always felt like a target. They shot one of my friends, a girl I knew. She survived, but she was pregnant with a baby who didn't. I just was tired of all that. I wanted to get away to Mexico. In those days, you could get away to Mexico, and it would be a quiet, civilized trip.
So y'all were traveling in Mexico not too far apart. Eddie, you were saying around 65, and then Powell, you're saying when you left town, probably more like 66.
When did you meet Travis Rivers?
He was a local kid. Most of the people that I met had gone to Austin High. Travis was one of the few people from McAllen that I knew. He was an intellectual in a football player's body. I liked Travis a whole lot. And as I look back on now, he did a bunch of stuff for me that kept me employed in music, for one thing.
Was he already out in California when you showed up there?
And he was when I showed up. Travis was one of those guys who went back and forth. So I'm not sure if he was around then or not. But he came in and moved into the scene I was in and charmed the girl I was singing with. So he became our manager.
Yeah.
With Tracy Nelson and Mother Earth?
Yeah, but they were together for about 10 years.
And Mother Earth had a couple of Texas connections, right? There's you, Boz Scaggs for a little bit early on, some folks from the Sir Douglas Quintet rhythm section maybe too, right?
When we made our first album, we used the West Side horn, all these Latino guys that played great horn. And we had Bob Arthur and Toad Andrews too.
Yeah.
Our rhythm section. Also, for the first album, George Raines on drums, another Austin boy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a lot of people's very favorite drummer.
Eddie and I have talked before about how we think that Mother Earth didn't get quite enough credit for being early on in kind of the country rock circles, the way that country music came back in to that California rock sound. And it might be because, like you were saying earlier, these kind of lines between folk and country and rock didn't mean as much to you necessarily as a Austin musician, a Texas guy.
In fact, I didn't care much for any of it, except Pete Seeger. But that was special because he was a historian, and I played a few of those songs.
So when you'll make the move out to California, were you still in touch with Janis out there?
I met Janis when I came out. She questioned me about whether or not I liked LSD. Do you like it? Well, I don't know, Janis. Some of it's okay, I guess. I don't like it. I assume she had a bottle of Southern Comfort.
So that was always kind of the lore. That Janis, as much as she's associated with this psychedelic movement, psychedelics weren't her thing as much as other substances and Southern Comfort, like you say.
But psychedelics made you deal with whether or not you could deal with yourself or not. I mean, the psychedelics were really scary if you didn't have the wherewithal, to pull it together when you got out on the edge. She was afraid of that. A lot of people were.
Yeah, Janis, like I said, had some demons that maybe she didn't want to confront a little bit. And what is the story behind how she came to record work that you wrote, Bye Bye Baby in particular?
When she came out, they recorded it as a deal mainstream record. Janis was doing my song, and I, unfortunately, was in Mexico. Didn't even know anything about it. Had to be in court for 3 years getting rights to it.
So your name wasn't on it that first time that they recorded it? Between that and international artists getting your name wrong on those Elevators recordings, I'm glad that we're able to restore your honor and respect on those songs now.
I know.
That's why it's good that we keep coming back to the original sources, the people who were there and can set us straight. Thanks for being willing to do that.
Sure. I want folks to know in the future how things were in the past.
So I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with y'all today. I feel like we have gotten into some of that 1960s Austin folky Threadgill's thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, buddy.
Well, the better the day, the better the deed. I appreciate it.
Bye, y'all. Austin Roots, executive produced by TSSI, produced by Renee O'Connor. Crybaby, courtesy of Jake Andrews Music. You need to get the memoir so you can get ready for the pop quiz. Go to threadgills.com and get Armadillo World Headquarters, a memoir. Do it now. Do it right.